For those of you who might not know, I'm Dan Little. I'm a professor emeritus in chemistry and biochemistry, and I have the privilege of introducing Art Sylvester, or Arthur Sylvester. More about that in a few minutes. I think many of you are familiar with Art through his books that are very well known, and I hope that a number of you have read them. Art will tell you some more about upcoming books and things of that sort. He was born in Southern California, went to grad school at UCLA, was not sure that he wanted to go into geology, but I gather became interested based on a lot of time outside and experience on biology, field trips and things of that nature. Taught at UCSB for a long time, just like many of us. And he's certainly well known for bringing Southern California geology to the masses. I think I'm closely quoting something that appeared in the Santa Barbara Independent. The Independent in the February 22 issue this year featured Art. And actually the title of the article in the Independent is Art Sylvester Brings Southern California Geology to the Masses. So I know that Art is passionate about these sorts of things, preaches the Nike approach, just do it. And it's something that I hold near and dear to my heart too. I tell my students oftentimes, just do it. But I want to, before handing the floor over to Art, I want to mention something that appeared in the Independent, and it said, in his retirement, Sylvester has become very active as president of the Santa Barbara Geological Society, etc. And speaking of lineages, Sylvester is an active in the little-known Society for the Preservation and Promulgation of the Name Arthur. Asked about its origins, Sylvester quickly confessed, quote, "Well, I made it up." It took me a while to be proud of my name. Hardly anyone is naming their kid Arthur these days. So with that, it gives you a feeling for the breath of fresh air that I think we're going to experience as Art presents his talk today. Thanks, Art.
Okay, let's get this going here. Well, hello everyone, and a very good afternoon to you wherever you may be. I'm here presently at home in Goleta, where I've been for the last 14 months, maybe like a lot of you, cooped up and avoiding the best I can this COVID virus. And I've been successful at that so far. I've been vaccinated. Like many of you, I'm just anxious to get out and get going again. So I thought I would tell you some places that you can go and get out and see some geology. And I used to say in my lectures that, once you take a course in geology, the world will never look the same to you again. You'll go out and you'll see things, you'll say, I never saw that again. And I've also said in my classes that you see what you're taught to see. So this afternoon, let me show you some places that you can go and see some geology. Some of these places are just great to take your grandchildren and get them involved in the outdoors too. I'm going to get a laser pointer up here and going right now, and let's start out our exploration of Southern California here by going right away to, let me push a button here and see if it works. There we go. Let's go to Moonstone Beach up in the Cambria area and look for some pebbles. Now, pebble hunting is a bit like fishing. Some days are better than others, but a day spent admiring pebbles on the San Simeon coast surely doesn't count against your longevity. Just about everyone, youngsters and oldsters, girls, boys, doctors, lawyers, market speculators, sports fans, and beach bums, they love to look for smooth, lustrous pebbles found on many mixed sand and pebble beaches. All you need is a discerning eye, protection from a cool sea breeze, and a back and legs flexible enough to allow you to pick up stones for a closer look. But beware, inspecting pebbles can be addictive. Now the pebbles up here at Cambria Beach are clustered around driftwood and large rocks and irregular projections of the sea cliff, where obstructions create centers for unusually high turbulence that winnows out the sand and leaves the pebbles behind. The picture of the pebbles here, you see lots of red ones, and there's some green ones, white ones, black ones. They're just fantastically beautiful. That shell down here in the lower right corner is about 2 inches long, to give you some idea of the pebbles. And they're so numerous and so abundant that for years, somebody was coming along with a big dump truck and hauling these away for landscaping in various places. So there's plenty there for you if you go out there, particularly after a storm or on a, be sure you go out there on a nice sunny day when the tide is low. Many of these pebbles are, as I mentioned, the colors, they're chert. They come in reddish brown and green, and you can assemble an amazing spectrum of shades of green, ranging from clear apple green through various gray greens to some very dark greens. One of the things, though, that you will not find, I don't think, at Moonstone Beach are moonstones. Moonstone is the common name for a rare, pearly white, semi-precious stone that belongs to the feldspar group of common rock-forming minerals. And it comes in many colors, including white, blue, gray, pink, green, peach, purple, brown, and yellow, but the specimens most eagerly sought are colorless, with a pearly sheen. They seem to glow in the dark, or excuse me, glow in the sunshine, and even more so in the moonlight. The Romans thought that moonstones were droplets from solidified rays of the moon, and today some people regard them as a traveler's amulet for protection, especially at night, a passion stimulant, or deflector of negativity, a cure for sleeplessness, and a panacea for a host of other ailments. So, alas, you may search in vain for a true moonstone at Moonstone Beach in the Cambria and San Simeon area, but this variety of feldspar is very uncommon in the bedrock that these pebbles came from. Well, one of the places I find surprising that few people that live here in Santa Barbara County have ever visited, and that's the Guadalupe Dunes. It's about 10 miles east of Santa Maria. The Guadalupe Dunes National Wildlife Refuge is home to more than 120 species of rare plants and animals, and contains some of the most remote and least disturbed habitats in the dune complex. The coastal dunes differ from most desert dunes in the large role that plants play in stabilizing their location, their size, and configuration. So this broad lowland where the Santa Maria River meets the sea is richly endowed with dunes, as you can see. In fact, the Guadalupe Dunes complex is the second largest remaining dune system in California. And it's one of the most spectacular lobes of dune sand along the entire Oregon and California coast. So you go out here and you look around and you'll find hardly anybody's there. On a beautiful day there, you can wander around the sand dunes, except when the snowy plovers are nesting, and they'll put ropes out to keep you out of the dunes. But you can still drive down to the actual seashore and park there at a parking lot that's right on the coast. You can also go over to Oso Flaco. There's a lake there. You walk out on this path that goes through the trees and go out here on a walkway across the lake. You'll see people fishing out there maybe, and then you can walk right out to the dunes there and walk around, and they don't worry about the snowy plover there. Well, the Guadalupe Dunes is famous for one other thing. In 1923, Cecil B. DeMille built the largest and most lavish set of movie history in the Guadalupe Dunes for his silent epic film, The Ten Commandments. This massive set was 120 feet high, 720 feet long, and was called the City of the Pharaoh. And after filming was complete, DeMille realized that the set would be too expensive to move, and he didn't want rival filmmakers to use it. So he ordered that it be blown up and secretly buried in a 300-foot-long trench in the dunes. And the faux scenery of the last city of Cecil B. DeMille lay buried in those shifting sands and forgotten for the next 60 years. Well, some film archaeologist found it in 1983, but then another 30 years elapsed before the archaeologists managed to get out one of these 21 fragile giant plaster Paris sphinxes, which is on display at the Dune Center in Guadalupe. So when you go out there to Guadalupe, be sure you stop by the little museum they have when and if it opens because of all this COVID business. I'm sure it will. Well, the desert dunes are just as fascinating as the coastal dunes are, perhaps maybe more so. The Kelso Dunes out in the Mojave Desert are not the highest or the most extensive in the California desert, but they are among the most spectacular. They've been closed off to off-road vehicles since 1973, so they're relatively protected from the kind of damage that has reduced some of California's other dunes to barren piles of sand. They are out there in the central part of the Mojave Desert, and it's just a wonderful place to go out and hike around in the dunes, particularly in the early morning or late afternoon. Most of the sand consists of minerals, quartz and feldspar, but there's also thin layers of black sand, mostly magnetite. If you go walk around and you see a dark patch, it will kind of catch your eye. Children enjoy dragging a magnet through the black sand, covering it with magnetite hair. The Kelso sand is so rich in magnetite, there was a Texas entrepreneur who once staked parts of the dunes as placer claims and planned to separate the magnetite to sell to a steel company. And fortunately for the dunes, that project didn't get anywhere. Fortunately for us too, because it would really have made a mess of the dunes. Here's one of my favorite places to hike in all of Southern California. This is the Devil's Punch Bowl Natural Area up on the north flank of the San Gabriel Mountains, about halfway between Palmdale and Wrightwood. It's a remarkably scenically beautiful county park with nearly 5,000 feet above sea level. And you can take a picnic and drinking water for a day of hiking among some really wonderfully colored rocks and geologic structures. The area is also a favorite of our UCSB geology students because there's some inviting swimming holes along some of the creeks, and the students can contemplate their geology from those swimming holes on warm days. Now, this is an aerial view that's looking down the axis of the Punch Bowl syncline. That's this big bowl-shaped looking structure that you see here in kind of the light colors. We're again looking at an aerial view up toward Palmdale. It's bounded on the left by a big fault that you can see making this mark down through the side of the picture here. That's the Punch Bowl Fault, which is an ancestor of the San Andreas Fault, which today is located off over here on the upper right corner of the photograph. And the rocks here are Miocene in age. That is, they're about 15 to 10 million years old. Then these rocks are crushed by the faulting, and over here are Precambrian rocks that are 1.9 or billion years or even older. So the contrast structure across here is just amazing, contrast in age. There are plenty of nice hikes to take out there. There's a 1 mile hike that's pretty nice. It goes down in among the Punch Bowl rocks and goes around in country like this. Again, it's a favorite of many people, but if you want a little bit more of a hike, then you go back to the previous picture, this one here, and there's a visitor center right here at the end of the road. And the trail takes off from the visitor center and goes out across this way over here and out to a place called the Devil's Seat, which overlooks the whole area out here. It's about a 3 mile out and back trip. Excuse me, it's 3 miles out and another 3 miles back. So it's going to be about a 6 mile round trip. As I said, it's up about 5,000 feet, and it's just a fantastic place to go in the spring or the fall. Take water with you. There's no drinking water available at the county park. Well, here's one of my very favorite places to take people. I took students out here every year for 30 years to see these volcanoes out in the Cinder Cone National Natural Landmark area. There are about 30 volcanoes out here. They're just bisected by Route 66, which is also a fun drive. One of these is called Amboy Crater. Probably erupted sometime between 25,000 and 80,000 years ago. And it's nicely preserved because it is out in the desert, so it doesn't get much erosion. You park your car out here on the highway and walk across the lava field for about a mile. And then you can walk around the edge of the cone here and then take a path that goes up into the crater. And maybe before you go into the crater, you can take a path up here and walk all around the rim of the crater and then duck back down into the crater like these students are doing over here, going down the trail down here to the bottom of this white patch, which is nested in these two rings, which represent the last activity of the volcano. And the other volcano out there is called Pisgah Crater. This is where I would take the students most of the time. It doesn't look as much like a volcano as Amboy does because the cone is made up of nice red cinders, the kind that you would put in your landscaping or the bottom of your barbecue pit. In fact, this is where they come from. They're been mining cinders here for, oh golly, 40 years or more. And so what they don't use, they dump here in these gray piles. But you can still drive up upon these gray piles, drive around the cone over here, park your car here, and then walk up into this crater of Pisgah Crater. It's a little closer to Santa Barbara than Amboy is. And then once you start looking around out in the lava field, you see some of these really cool structures out here, such as Pahoehoe lava. Maybe some of you have been watching the Icelandic eruptions today on YouTube and seeing some of these fantastic lava flows that are making structures just like you see here. But these are more nearly 25,000 years old. There are also lava tubes out there that they're large enough you can practically drive a truck down through them or maybe a small train. And that makes a lot of fun for grandchildren to go and explore too. Well, one of the places that people told me that they think is one of the best parts of things I've been showing them is the Santa Barbara Harbor, which in many ways is one of the most, I'll say biggest mistake or coastal boondoggle in coastal engineering. It started out back in 1929 or 28 or so when Major Max Fleischmann of yeast fame wanted an anchorage for his yacht closer to his home in Santa Barbara than in Goleta Slough, which would have been the other choice for a harbor. So he offered a sum of $200,000 to be matched by public funds to construct a breakwater about 600 feet offshore, parallel to the beach. That would be this one over here in the 1929 photo, and you can see Stearns Wharf over here behind it, which was already there. The site that was selected was off Point Castillo, which is now down at the end of Castillo Street. It was referred to as Castle Rock site because of a ragged offshore rock that was later demolished in the 1925 earthquake. Well, that's interesting. I didn't have any thought to that. It was later demolished. But once they got the breakwater going, it worked for a while, but they left this part right here open, and the sand, which normally drifts down the beach this way, started to fill up the harbor. So to rectify that, Major Fleischmann gave an additional $250,000 to connect an elbow that attached the west end of the breakwater to the beach at the foot of Point Castillo. And this L-shaped structure, which was completed in 1930, successfully protected the harbor from further sand deposition from the west for about 3 years. And then the sand started making its way around the end of the breakwater and started filling in the harbor up here, as you see in 1964. And that certainly wasn't going to do. The boats needed to get in and out. And so today, the Santa Barbara Harbor is currently in a state of quasi-equilibrium thanks to continuous dredging. It's an expensive process. Problems like this, we've got to work with nature rather than against it. This dredge costs the city of Santa Barbara, supported by, I guess, funds from the federal government, to the tune of $10 million a year. Dredges the sand out of this part of the harbor here, and then takes it underneath Stearns Wharf and dumps it back on the coast so that it doesn't starve all the beaches farther on down the coast, as it did when it was first built. One of the best places to go see all of this is to go up to Santa Barbara City College to the overlook that they have on the campus, or go out here on the breakwater and walk out on the breakwater, and then you can make your way along the rocks and the beach out here and stand right out here on this point and see the dredge and get some idea for what this harbor once was and may well be sometime in the future. Well, here's another one. This was more of a disaster rather than a boondoggle. This is the St. Francis Dam near Santa Clarita. At the time, it's been commonly regarded as the worst American civil engineering disaster in the 20th century. Its catastrophic collapse was on March 12, 1928, almost at midnight. And the 70-mile long, 2-mile wide swath of land was denuded of vegetation as the deluge made its way down through the Santa Clara River Valley on its way to the Pacific Ocean. It took 5 years to go through, 5 hours to go from the dam all the way down to the Pacific Ocean. And in doing so, it drowned at least 400 people. Destroyed 900 homes, many bridges, and 24,000 acres of farmland. Now you can see a good bit of this dam today. Here's what it looked like back in when it was completed in 1928. And you see it was a great place. It was a narrow part of the canyon. You put in a fairly small dam and dam up a big area that held something at the time about 30,000 acre feet of water, which is a good supply to keep Los Angeles well watered. Today, you can walk up this abandoned road, and you can park either at one end of the road or you can park up here at the end of the road, and you can walk along here and see the concrete remnants of the dam. After the dam failed, there was a big part of it that was stood way up high, and they came along and dynamited it afterwards because it was a public nuisance and because people were climbing all over and I guess falling off. As you walk up here, you'll get to see the two kinds of rocks that form the abutment for the dam. One here is called the Pelona Schist, which I'll show you more of in a moment. And the other is the Vasquez Formation, and I'll also show you in a moment. Up here, I've labeled this the remnant of a wing wall, and I'll tell you more about that. Here are the two rocks. One is the Pelona Schist. It's about 75 million years old, and it's got a lot of micaceous mineral in it. So it's kind of a, I'll say kind of a slippery rock, or one that shears very easily. And then over here is the Vasquez Formation, which is, it's maybe about 30 million years old. And it's cemented with gypsum. And that's not good. When you hydrate the rock that has gypsum in it, the gypsum will tend to expand and cause the rock to disaggregate. So if you're going to put a dam here and have water banking up against this, you could be in great trouble. Well, that's what happened. Here's a cross section of the dam. And one of the things you can see here is that there's the Vasquez Formation, and it's separated from the Pelona Schist by a fault. And you say, oh, that's not good. Well, many dams are built across faults because Faults are easily eroded by water, and so canyons usually etch their way along faults, and then you want to put a dam in, you're going to have to be crossing a fault. Not too much of a problem if you know the fault is there, and if you know it hasn't moved lately. This particular fault here is covered by rocks downstream that are 10 million years old, unbroken. So this fault is an old one and not to worry, or at least in this case, not to worry. The dam did get some cracks in it, and they started stuffing them full of oakum. But the thing that really wrecked this dam was probably that to make the volume of the reservoir greater so they could store more water, they increased the height of the dam by 8 feet and built this wing wall out over here to the side to help raise the level of the water. But they did not increase the height or the weight of the dam. So what happens over here on the right side of the picture here is that there's a force of water against the dam, the reservoir force, and the dam load, which is balancing the uplift pressure from the groundwater, because you see we've got a water load here, and that's translating over here to the uplift pressure in the dam. If you raise the water level, there's going to be an increased amount of pressure on the bottom of the dam. And if it's not compensated by the weight of the dam can merely float away. And that may be what happened, why this dam failed, was that once it got full, the water load was too great, increased the uplift pressure, and the dam could no longer hold the water back. And if that's the case, then that's the big engineering blunder, is that they didn't compensate for the increase of the reservoir height once they increased the height of the dam. Here's another place I think a lot of you have probably been to before and ought to go visit again, and that's Morro Rock. And Morro Rock is a great thing. It's about 25 million years old. It's the stump of an old volcano. That is, that this used to be a giant big volcano that the rocks around it have all eroded away now, leaving just the really hard part of the core of the volcano behind. And, you know, everybody remembers a view of this rock if you've been there. It's 581 feet above the sea. It was described in 1769 by Juan Crespi, who said he saw a great rock in the form of a round morro, which is the Spanish for a promontory or a nose, which at high tide is isolated and separated from the coast by a little less than a gunshot. Now, that's a neat way to describe it. And so it looks so unusual, you wonder how it's formed. I said it's a stump of an old volcano, but it's not the only one. We're looking across Morro Rock, across the town of Morro Bay, and here's another one. Here's another stump of volcano, and another, and another, and another. They're described as the Seven Sisters, but in fact, there are really 13 of them. And so when you drive along, I guess it's the highway to get out to Morro Bay, you'll pass Hollister Peak, which itself is 1,400 feet high. You'll pass Chumash Peak and Cerro Romualdo. Even if you're driving up 101, up to San Francisco or wherever you go, and you go up 101 and you pass San Luis Obispo, there's a hill right out here back of Madonna Inn. And until I put this little story together, I didn't know that that used to be the stump of one of these 13 different volcanoes. When you're out at Morro Bay and at the rock, you can look at some of the boulders down at the bottom of the hill, and you can see what kind of rock is making the volcanoes. It's called a dacite. It's kind of intermediate between basalt and a very light colored, very explosive kind of volcanic rock called rhyolite. It's intermediate between the two. And you can see white specks in here. Those are feldspar crystals, and there are black ones in there, which are, some of them are mica, and some of them are a couple other kinds of minerals. So this is a good place to go and see some young volcanoes. young relatively, as I said, 25 million years ago. Well, all of these things I've just been telling you about are in these guidebooks. They're the Roadside Geology of Southern California is just one of a whole series of these roadside books. It's published by the Mountain Press up in Missoula, Montana. They've been publishing roadside books for since 1972. The first one was, in fact, the Roadside Geology of Northern California, and they wanted a sequel right away of Southern California. Well, it was about 25 years ago. They called me up and they said, can you do this? And I said, well, no, I am really too busy right now. I think I was department chairman at the time. And I just don't know enough to be able to write a book like this. So just about 10 years ago, I was family across the desert and looking at rocks and mountains here and there. And I thought, you know, I know something about that mountain that probably students will never know because they don't get out on the ground now. They do most of their geology from a computer. And even in this COVID times, of course, that's probably true. So I said, I really ought to write this book. So I called up the editor and said, have you got anybody to write this book? Well, no. Well, I can do it. She said, well, send us a prospectus. And I sent her the prospectus, and 10 days later, she sent me a contract. So the Roadside Geology of Southern California is one of about 30, maybe 40 of these books that cover much of the United States. There's a Roadside Geology of Texas, for example, a Roadside Geology of Illinois, Roadside Geology of Maine. This is a very well-known series, and our book is well enough known that it's already in its third printing, published in 2012. The other one that came out just last April, not the previous April, but back in 2020, the beginning of the pandemic, is Geology Underfoot in Southern California. And this was a series started by the Mountain Press in 1997. And the first one was the Geology Underfoot in Southern California. You'll notice that this one is the second edition, which has been brought up to date and colorized, because the first edition was all black and white and was sadly out of date here in 2019, 2020. So I got together with previous authors and wrote this one up. It's all prized and just a great book. So the things I've been showing you today mostly are taken from Geology Underfoot in Southern California. Both of these books, including Roadside, have a map showing the locations of the various chapters. We call them vignettes because they're not intended to be blow-by-blow descriptions of the geology just for geologists. These are written for, well, we say the interested layman, the one who just wants to get out and see some things and learn some things. It's maybe at the level of a first-year graduate student who knows a little bit of jargon, but each book is full of words in a glossary. So this afternoon, I took you up here to number 8 at Morro Bay, Moonstone Beach. We went to Morro Bay. We went to Guadalupe Dunes. We went out here to Pisgah Crater and Amboy Crater. The book also goes to Torrey Pines State Beach, goes to a couple other beaches up here. It goes along the San Andreas Fault in several places, and there's some things to see down here in Ventura. And then I told you that we also visited Santa Barbara Harbor. Each of the vignettes has a nice location map like this one. This is for Morro Rock. There's the rock out there at the end of the road on end of Highway 1 in Morro Bay. And then here are the 13 other volcanoes here that I said are all part of this 25,000-year-old volcanic event that must have been spectacular to see it during its time. It isn't going to happen today or anymore in this area because the process that built these volcanoes is long gone. But I told you about the Pisgah crater and Amboy crater out in the Mojave Desert, and those volcanoes are relatively youthful, and those could there could be another eruption out there at any time. And if you've been watching the eruption in Iceland right now that started up in early March, 30,000 people have already been out there to stand alongside the lava flows and watch the volcano erupt. Can you imagine what it would be like out there today in the Mojave Desert if we should get a nice volcanic eruption that people could get fairly close to safely and access? It'll be just a zoo. Well, here's what I'm working on right now with another fellow. He was the author on a book called Roadside Geology of Death Valley and Owens Valley. He invited me to work with him on the second edition of that book, which was also in its first edition, all in black and white, and had some pretty crude drawings in them. So right now we are making a color version of this book, are updating all of it, things that need updating, and putting in all these beautiful maps. Right now, as we put this book together, I think we have somewhere around 300 color photos in this book for a book that sells for about $24, which it's a bargain. The really high quality paper, really high quality books. Well, now here's one of the places that the book I'm working on is going to visit. It's called the Buttermilk Country up near Bishop. And the attraction there are these big giant boulders. How in the heck do you get great big boulders laying out in the countryside? Let's look at the arrows up here in the upper left. See these people standing there? I'll give you some idea of how big these boulders are. A very favorite attraction for these bouldering people who like to just go climb boulders, people who get challenged by trying to climb underneath this boulder and up and around and get up over on the top of it. It's just a fantastic place to go. The co-author and I visited this about 2 months ago, and we're just astonished at how big these boulders are and trying to figure out how in the heck did they get there. You talk to the climbers and they say, oh, well, the glaciers brought them down to Sierra Nevada. No, there are no rocks exactly like these up in the Sierra Nevada. These boulders are very like the granite that they're laying here on the ground, that they're on top of. Maybe they just weathered in place and they're just remnants of the bedrock that are here. No, we've found out that, well, you can see up in the upper left, there's a pit in this one. And all these boulders, in fact, have pits on the top of them, but many of the boulders have rolled around and the pits are on the sides of the boulders now, or even on the bottoms of them. If you go up to where the bedrock is, you'll find that the bedrock only has pits on the tops. So I'm not going to give you the story of how this happened. Watch for the book when it comes out and you'll get the full story there. Better yet, get out, get all this COVID stuff, get out here and go see for yourself. I think you'll be truly amazed and glad that you did it. Well, everybody, I am really pleased that you joined us here this afternoon. And many thanks to the Emeriti Association and UCSB. And I suppose, Dan, we're ready for questions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Art. It was really fascinating. I'm sure there are questions, and I open the floor to anybody who wants to ask some. Just unmute yourself and jump right in.
The next question with you, Dan, was anybody there?
Yes, it says even now that there are 63 participants.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it got up to 80 or so.
Oh, great.
Yes.
I see one down here. What's the significance of the spiral in the Amboy crater? Ha ha. Somebody was really paying attention. Well, I could be facetious and say that was an ammonite fossil there in the bottom of the crater. That's the way it looked. It was a spiral-like ammonite form. No, that was just somebody put out there to make a nice design to get questions when the picture comes up on.
So Art, can you see these other questions that are showing up in the Q&A?
Sure, I can do that. Let me pop this one here. What's the best place to vault? Yes, I think the best place between Wrightwood and Palmdale, and that part that's covered in the geology underfoot in California. It takes you right along that part of the fault. There are places where you can hand on the fault, you can straddle it and say, well, I've got 1 foot on the Pacific plate and the other on the North American plate. And God help us if the fault break right now. For an 1857, that broke along through there and was displaced things 30 feet. There's a corral up at Fort Hone that was 30 feet in diameter. And after the fault had ruptured through, the corral was shaped like a letter S. Yeah, that's the place to go. What is a schist? And you did spell it right, Diane. Schist is a rock. If I say it's a foliated rock or it's a schistose rock, that is, it's very planar. It slips very easily. It's not a very good rock to build a dam. It's a metamorphic. It used to be shale. It's been cooked, and now it's the mines are recrystallized to usually chlorite, maybe some mica, and they're all lined up, so it's a very slippery rock. Not good for dams. Was the movie Tremors filmed at the Buttermilk Boulders? I think the Tremors was filmed in the Alabama hills. We just looked that up. That had, I don't remember who the actor was in it, but he was fighting big worms out there in Tremors, and that was in the Alabama hills. Here's another one. Anomalous attendee. Why are there multicolored rocks in the Cambria area and not along other beaches? Oh, you guys are really good. The pebbles and the material that's on the beaches is coming, of course, from the land. The creeks erode the rocks. They bring the detritus, sand and gravel down to the beach and spread it on the beach, and the waves toss it back and forth. So the mountains up there, in the San Simeon Cambrian area, are composed of what's called the Franciscan Formation. It's the Franciscan Formation takes its name from the city of San Francisco, where you know about Nob Hill and some of those others. They're made of chert, which is an ocean floor rock. So much of this Franciscan Formation was deposited and formed and metamorphosed down deep, and then is brought up along big faults and characterizes the mountains along that part of the Central California coast. You get down here in our area, and our mountains are made up of sedimentary rocks, sandstone and shale, and that's why we have sort of sandy beaches. The best beaches are down in the San Diego area, where the creeks bring down sand from the granite that's up there and all along the peninsular ranges. And so most of that sand is quartz. Up here, it's mostly feldspar. And then up there at San Simeon, it's Franciscan Formation, has a lot of chert and other good things in it. how did the buttermilk boulders get there? And I said, I'm not going to tell you. I said, you need to see the book and see how we figured it out, and and go up there and see them for yourselves. Where are the red cliffs behind you? Those are up in the Red Rock Canyon State Park, which is on Highway 14 as you drive up to Bishop and Mammoth. I'll bet most of you have driven by there several times, have seen the pretty rocks there and thought, well, you know, we ought to stop here sometime. And my book says, yes, do it. Get out of your car and get out there and go look at the rocks. They have a very nice little visitor center right in the middle of the park. It has fossils of that are found in the rocks around there. The rocks themselves are on the order of about, I'll say 10 million years old. So they're fossils of sloths and dire wolves and other kinds of critters that lived in the Pleistocene era. So it's a great place to go and camp. And one of the places that in the world where I've been and saw the best shooting stars I've ever seen. Now let's see, we got another question here. What kind of rocks are mountains made of here in Santa Barbara? These are mostly Eocene. That's about 45 million year old sandstone rocks that were deposited in the ocean. And a lot of shale up there. Drive up the Gibraltar Road and you get good views of the kinds of rocks there. Mostly sandstone and shale that are about 40 million years old. Well, please say a little bit about the infamous erosion of Guadalupe Beach. The big problem at Guadalupe Beach is that it's just not getting the sand coming down through there that it used to, I'll say before about 1950. What happened after 1950? Well, they built Bradbury Dam, and so the San Ynez River that used to carry sand all the way out of the mountains up there and down to the coast, and then the ocean currents would bring it around Point Conception, bring it down along our Gaviota, Isla Vista, Goleta, Santa Barbara coastline. Most of the sand has just been shut off. The cliffs along the Gaviota coast here are mostly a shaly kind of rock. That doesn't make sand. And so the only way we're going to keep any kind of a beach there at Guadalupe Beach is to bring sand in and dump it there artificially, like they do in a lot of the beaches down in Florida. They just have to bring the sand in because it erodes away. As sea level continues to rise, the problem is only going to get worse. We had a plan one time to make what was called a permeable pier there at the Guadalupe Pier, whereby the currents would be slowed down and drop their sand, but the water would go on through and the sand would eventually go through after this little pocket behind the pier filled up. And then the sand could go on just fine. And no, that got turned down. So right now, the only thing that's saving Guadalupe Beach are the big boulders out there. And my solution to that is take the boulders out and put them back in again in a carefully engineered way rather than just dump them the way they've been dumped. Can I say more about the formation of the 13 Sisters? Before about 16 million years ago, there used to be a big offshore tectonic plate called the Farallon Plate. And it was driving its way eastward against the North American plate, which was driving westward. The two plates would go down, or the one plate would go down underneath the other, get down deep, melt, and come back up and make volcanoes. And that's what happened there. This is 25 million years ago. There was just a big, long line of active volcanoes there. Then, in the succeeding 25 million years, all the ground that those volcanoes poked up through and built their big volcano shapes got eroded away and left just the stumps of the volcanoes themselves. And why do the buttermilk boulders have holes on the surface instead of just on the top? That's part of the story, part of the ones that I don't really quite want to tell you, because I want you to go up and see for yourself and be just amazed by the story when you see it. So this is just a teaser. It's a problem left for the student to go and look at, or buy the book and it'll tell you then. The book, I hope, is going to go to the editor at the end of this week. How will I know the boulders got there when I go see them for myself? Well, give some thought to those holes that you just brought up there, John Wilson. Give some thought to those. And if I tell you in the rock that's in place, the bedrock, those holes are only on the tops of the boulders, or on the tops of the bedrock. And then you get down to where the boulders are and you see that the boulders are in different orientations and the holes are different orientations. That ought to give you the clue. Let's see. We're coming down here to, you've been documenting the deteriorating cliffs at UCSB over the years. What's going to happen to that area in the future? More erosion, more deterioration of the cliffs. Mother Nature's going to win. And the solution at Guadalupe Beach is to protect the beach, protect the park there by the rocks. Up in the Santa Cruz area, they've got an erosion problem too, and they had an engineering solution where they, I'll say they concreted the cliff, made it look like it was a natural cliff. Nobody knows the difference, and they've at least slowed down the erosion. Maybe over the next 50, 100 years, the sea will reclaim that cliff by knocking down the concrete, but it's been successful so far. It's an expensive proposition. It's got a lot of environmental consequences, and it's not going to be an easy solution. Judy Headley says, were they lacking structural information when first building the St. Francis Dam? The fellow who was in charge of the whole thing was William Mulholland. And he was not a geologist, he was an engineer. And he had been very successful in building engineering structures and thought that, I'll say he didn't need to be told what the geology was like. Just go ahead, it's a perfect place to put a dam. You might say the geology be damned. He did build a twin to that dam that's still standing today up in the Hollywood Hills. Once the St. Francis Dam failed, the engineers went out to the dam in the Hollywood Hills and put bracing into it, buttresses, and as I say, that dam is still there today and doing well. Do you guide trips or participate in nonprofit groups' excursions? Yes, I have. I've done this up until, I'll say, the last few years when you might say the market is dried up. Sometimes a UCSB organization will say, can you take us on a field trip somewhere? And say, sure, let's do this. And then we go and do it. One of the biggest problems, as you well know, is that there's the problem of liability. And I had a fellow tell me one time that he says, Art, you really can't afford to do this. If somebody should get hurt or die and they turn around and sue you, you'd just have nothing. They'd get away from you. So I've been shying away from that. And if I do it, it has to be under some kind of an umbrella that protects me from liability. We see rocks burning within the cliffs near Goleta. Is that common elsewhere? And the answer is yes. The first place that I can tell you you could see this when they get on fire are halfway between Montecito and Ventura on the Rincon. There's a place down there, if you notice the cliffs, they're sort of a reddish brown. And that's because the rocks have actually been burning there and they turned brown. One of the better places to see this is above above Fillmore. And there's a road that goes up into the mountains to the south of Fillmore to a quarry up there where they will sell you burnt rocks. And those rocks burned naturally through fires, I don't know, thousands of years ago. Today, up in the mountains up behind Ojai, there's a place that right now is so doggone hot that the people who went up there to study it, some of them got burned kind of badly from the hot rocks up there. And it's a what's going on up there is that there's a mineral that when it oxidizes, it gives off heat. And there's a lot of that mineral up there, and it's making everything just terribly hot. Okay, how is our coastline different from the Oregon, Northern California coastline in terms of plate activity and erosion? Very different. First of all, our coastline right here, as you know, it faces to the south. So we don't get direct storm waves coming out of the Pacific Ocean. We don't get the strength of wave battering that Northern California, Oregon gets, even the Guadalupe Dunes area. Our waves come around through the Santa Barbara Channel and get reflected and refracted around, so that the strength of those is, oh, here's my darn phone ringing. Please ignore that phone. In addition to that, tectonically, we are part of the Pacific Plate that is drifting north toward the Aleutian Islands. The Pacific Plate stretches in from our San Andreas Fault all the way to Japan. Up in Oregon and Washington, there's still a little bit of the Farallon Plate that's driving eastward, and it's driving underneath the North American Plate there. And as a consequence, the edge of that Farallon Plate is getting melted down there and coming back up as the Cascade volcanoes. The southernmost volcano is, Medicine Creek, I guess, up in Northern California. Lassen Peak is one of them. And you get south of that, and all of a sudden you're at a different kind of plate boundary, the San Andreas boundary. And our plate boundary, or our part of the Pacific Plate, is just slipping and sliding horizontally, so that eventually we'll be up alongside San Francisco. And then you're going to wonder, well, is Santa Barbara a suburb of San Francisco, or is Santa Barbara a suburb of San Francisco? So there are two different tectonic plates working here, and two different kinds of tectonic activity to make our different coastlines. And is there one more down here? Yes, Dan Hone. Hi, Dan. Will it be available to watch again? And the answer is yes. Maybe Dan can tell you about that. Dan is muted. Here he comes.
Yep. So thank you, Art. That was just very, very fascinating. And I'm not usually one who likes to get out of the car and do some of the things that you have mentioned, but I'm certainly inspired to. And if I get my son out here, we'll be doing some of that, I'm sure. Yes, Dan, the spiel today is being recorded. Karen will upload it, download it, or whatever, so that it will be made available to anybody who would like to access it. So Karen will hear me saying these words, and she'll make sure that we do as I said. But I know there are many, many people, including those who attended today, who would love to hear this. I want to personally thank Art for just a really fascinating talk, a real eye-opener, and very inspirational. So thanks very much, Art.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you.
Thank you. So cheers.
Yeah, I'm taking off here. Goodbye.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for coming.